the greatest of all time, Mr. Bruno Simão, from Bruno Simão Law. Let's get into it.
Sure.
Another issue, Bruno, that came now. Let's take it that myself, Kabi, I'm the what you call prospective investor buyer. So I'm buying for investment purposes, and depending on the circumstances, I won't say fortunately or unfortunate. I'm married, and unfortunately, I happen to go through divorce. So now the question is, now I have accumulated this number of assets. My asset portfolio is quite very hard. I have accumulated a number of investment properties, and I'm married in community of property with my husband, soon to be an ex if we are going through divorce. What are the implications, and how can I, as a property investor, protect my asset portfolio from the entire process? Over to you, thanks.
Sure. So one of the scary things in the South African environment is that a lot of people are still married in community of property. Now, the reason this happens, it's because it's the default matrimonial property regime that applies in South Africa. And in order for it not to apply, one would usually have to sign an antenuptial contract prior to the marriage in order to be out of community of property. Now, this does not always happen. And either it's due to being misinformed and not knowing this. There's also stigma attached to signing an antenuptial contract, unfortunately, where by signing one, it's said that one is preparing for divorce. And unfortunately, again, in the South African context, that's simply just not true. Being married out of community of property actually protects you from the outside world, from creditors. And I'll explain now in a second. It's not just about preparing for divorce and the consequences of a divorce, because you can actually draft an antenuptial contract so that it has certain similar elements to being married in community of property, but between the parties. But insofar as people outside of the marriage are concerned, creditors, you still have the protection of being married out of community of property. So let's delve in a little bit into community of property. Now, imagine community of property is when you take 2 cups of water or 2 glasses of water and you fill them into one, right? Now, everything is mixed. A lot of it is mixed. You don't know what goes where. You might think that you know what goes where because you believe that those assets are yours, but they're not, right? They joined into this marriage. So what is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. And that's quite simply the truth, right? In community of property. Now, between the spouses, that might not be a bad thing. Maybe they love each other immensely, and the fear of divorce isn't even something on their mind. But the problem is when we speak of joint estates, we're actually speaking about how creditors on the outside look at these estates. And the creditors don't look at 2 individuals, each having their own assets and each being capable of being sued in their own right. They look at one joint estate. Now, as a property investor, this is a massive risk, because if your spouse, for example, is a property investor or a business owner, and inherently being a property investor or being a business owner carries some risks to it. And if they go into business and for some reason something goes wrong, and there's creditors after them looking to collect monies that are due to them, in this case, these assets fall within the joint estate. So whatever you as a spouse thought was protected, or that you would at least be left with if something were to go wrong, it's not the case anymore. Unfortunately, then it's going to be attached by these creditors because it belongs to both of you. Now, in a divorce, which is what you're asking about, similar concept. In this instance, you as an individual feel or think that these assets belong to you, but they don't, right? Half the estate belongs to you. Now, if that estate happens to have enough assets to be able to divide equally, then great, so be it. One property goes to your spouse, one property goes to you. But what if it doesn't? What if these properties are bonded? What if one person wants the property and the other person wants the property, and now you keep fighting about who is going to get this property? If there's no money in the estate, the property is going to need to be sold. So you as a property investor might lose a cash flowing asset that is far worth more to you because it's cash flowing than the actual value of the property itself. But that's not going to help you, because in order to dissolve the marriage, you're probably going to need to sell it in order for there to be enough money in the estate to divide 50-50. And as a property investor, that is a really, really bad way to do business.
Wow, Bruno, and correct me, am I correct to say, in this instance whereby there's divorce proceedings involved, whereby one party is a property investor, in this case, I'm making a typical example of myself. Let me say I'm married to Tabo and we are going through divorce. So legally, it will not matter as to whether Tabo found me with 5 properties before our marriage. It will not matter legally.
No.
He will definitely still be obliged to 50% of the estate. Whether he came into my life while I've already secured these properties,
Sure.
The law will not say no. It will only focus to what we have accomplished together during our marriage term. Is that correct?
So speaking very generally to, let's say, 90% of our viewership, the general rules in relation to being married in community of property will dictate that all assets will fall into this joint estate on the day of marriage. So whatever existed or whatever belonged to you prior to that date of marriage, inconsequential, it falls into the joint estate. Now, there are certain laws that create exceptions to this. These are exceptions. And it only speaks to about, let's say, 5% of the viewership. And these exceptions, there's a lot of case law around them and when they apply and why they apply. And some of it does relate to the spouse's behavior in the marriage. But it's very limited circumstances where a person would find application. And in truth, as I mentioned, 90% of the viewership will probably find that in their instances, they will have to divide their estate 50-50. The only way to enter into a position where you go into the marriage and you retain ownership of what you owned prior to entering into the marriage is when you sign an antenuptial contract. Now, the antenuptial contract will then give you options as to what happens to the assets acquired after the marriage. But that's a different conversation, because there we start having conversations around what's called accrual. And accrual is a funny thing. It's not like a joint estate. So as far as creditors are concerned, your assets are still safe. It doesn't create a joint estate. All it does is, if it so happens that a person passes away or divorces, they're going to measure both estates and they're going to look for the difference. So let's say one grew by 20,000, the other grew by 1 million. They will take the difference between the two and they will separate that equally amongst the spouses. But it doesn't actually have anything to do with the creditors, because in the creditor's mind, they still see two individual people capable of being sued in their own rights, irrespective of whether they plan to divorce at some point or another. During the marriage, there is no joint estate. It's two individual people.
Wow. Thank you so very much. This is so mind-blowing. Yes, Ekel, I'm sure you have learned a lot when it comes to your assets protection, especially to you aspiring property investors. When you now finally meet somebody, your soulmate, and you get so excited The only thing that you can see, it's you now setting up the wedding date. Don't forget about the most important matters here. Make sure that you consult with your legal representative. I always vouch for Bruno because it doesn't matter where you are at. You can always be able to connect with him, whether you are based in Cape Town, as long as you are having an access to a laptop and Wi-Fi. You can always connect and consult with him. Please do so that you make sure that you make the right decision and that your assets are protected. Because I can just imagine losing everything that you have built, through your hard-earned salary and everything, and now suddenly having to share it with somebody else equally. It's a sad story, but unfortunately, it's a reality. Bruno, without wasting your time, just to sum up this, what advice, main advices that you can give to prospective property investors in terms of making decision-making when they now getting married? We're now starting first into looking into when everybody's excited, they are getting married. Yeah. What are the two most important things that they need to look into in order to protect their assets, because they never know what will happen to the marriage in the long run, as we sum this up?
Sure. So when entering into a new marriage, and this isn't even just about property investors, this is everyone in general. When entering into a new marriage, I would strongly consider having an antenuptial contract signed. I would definitely suggest having the conversation with an appropriate attorney that can actually converse around the fact that there is no stigma attached to it. This isn't a foreseeing the possibility of a divorce, not at all. And it does take a special kind of attorney to actually be able to have those conversations. And it does take a very open spouse to be able to understand those conversations, because I've had conversations with people that refuse to believe that are thinking that we're trying to sell them into a product. But to be honest with you, I mean, it's not that grand a product, to be 100% honest. So it's actually a call it a must. It's a requirement. It's something that I almost feel that should become a default when it comes to our legal system. But if you're entering into a marriage, consider it. At least have a look, Google it. If you've already entered into a marriage, and this is a conversation that now you're having, as I do with many people, there are ways of changing the matrimonial property regime. It does take a bit of effort, but there are ways of doing it. And one can also strategically utilize vehicles such as trusts in order to be able to mitigate the consequences of an unfortunate matrimonial property regime. So that, unfortunately, is a conversation for a different day. But there are options. There's options to everyone entering into a marriage and people that are already in a marriage.
Wow, thank you so much, Bruno. As always, we always appreciate your input. Dear Cycle, I always say to you, you must consider yourself very lucky, because having this 30 minutes consultation with Bruno, it can cost you an arm and leg. But here we are very much passionate. We are very much putting your best interest at heart, so that we always offer you information that is relevant. And as per Bruno has said, make sure that you make the right decision before you enter that marriage. You consult legally. And fortunately, as Bruno said, it might happen that you are already married, and now you have acquired these particular properties without having this knowledge that we are giving you today. Bruno has said it is possible. It might take longer, it might be a process, but it is possible to review the contents of the contract of your marriage. So it's not yet too late. Get in touch with us, myself, Ntabisa Maleke, we buy property, Bruno from Bruno Samalo. Thank you so much, Bruno, and have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Cheers. Until next week.
All right.
Thank you.